Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 p.m. I'll just give a couple more minutes for more people to join. But first of all, I just wanted to thank you all for your interest in this webinar and how to return to the lab with BOOKKIT and safely do research again. It's my absolute honor to be presenting to more than 100 people, and we've actually had more than 300 registrations. So it really says a lot about the work that we're doing, and this wouldn't be possible without all of you. So thank you very much, and welcome to this webinar. So I think people will just join, and I think I will jump ahead. So my name is Francisco. I'm head of BOOKKIT Academia here at Cluster Markets, and today we're going to be talking about what a lot of scientists are waiting for. So returning to the lab after such a life-changing event, and so we can start doing again what we like to do and what we do best, which is scientific research, which, as we know, is so much important, especially in times like this. It's when the general people see the importance of science in our lives. So for today, I will just give a brief intro about this life-changing pandemic, and so then we can jump into the new reality for a safe return, and then also some useful guidelines and solutions so you can go back to the lab safely. And I'll also share some examples from labs that are already using BOOKKIT and how you can also use the system for your own benefit and to ensure the safety of everyone when returning to the lab. Afterwards, we'll just have a quick Q&A session and discussion if it leads to that. So please mute yourself on this call. Do not use the microphone to speak, and you also don't need any video. So use the chat box to write any questions that you have. And you can also post them on Twitter using the hashtag return to the lab. So it's return to the lab. And you can also tag us. So it's at BOOKKIT with 2 O's and 2 K's. And I have my colleague Gabriella, which will just post some of the questions here. So we can also answer them. Don't worry, don't worry if we don't have enough time to answer all of the questions. We'll just reply on the thread itself. And afterwards, we'll just have a quick demo session so I can show you live all the features that I'll be talking about today for you to return to the lab. So without further ado, basically, everyone agrees that this is an unprecedented event in our lives. And we hope that we don't face such an event in the future. I believe this is the first in all of our lives. So we know what happened. So basically, a full lockdown was in place. Most of the countries in the world, all services, all things closed down. We were forced to stay at home, basically. And then, of course, it reduced a lot of our freedom, and it prevented a lot of people from doing their work or doing their normal routines. It increased the stress as well, of course, because a lot of people actually lost their jobs. A lot of people went home without having an idea of how the future will look like. And we have faced new realities. That's the truth, basically. So the result is a lot of pivoting, a lot of adapting, and basically a new way of living. Which I think it's quite positive because we can learn a lot from what happened in order to improve our lives in the future, whether there is a pandemic or there isn't. So, and scientists were some of the most affected ones. So we know that research is mainly done in the lab. So unless you have a lab at home, you can't really do your work. So, and we know that most scientific labs or buildings shut down. So all scientists were at home for the past 2.5 months, which means that the work was basically put on hold. And of course, teams stay separated as well. So of course, we always have Zoom and all the fancy communication tools online, but it's not the same, and we all know that. So that's something that's happened as well. So you know that on the last webinar, we have developed new ways of doing science from home, but it's never the same. So the real work happens in the lab. So the result is that scientists cannot wait to go back, of course. And that's why we're here today. We're here to help you going back, but in a safe way. So this return, we all know that it can't be a normal return. So it's not like returning from vacations. So a lot of change. There's a new reality in place, a lot of new rules. And I think we have adapted to most of them. We just need to learn to live with them for a while now. So basically, I will face this in 4 different points for this new reality and the new rules that are in place and that we should comply with. So first is that the return will be a phased one. So we're not just going back everyone at the same time to the lab. So most buildings will reopen if they didn't reopen already at a reduced capacity. And of course, introducing more and more people over time as the situation improves. And that leads to reduced schedules for some people and also having shifts in place so then different groups of people can still go to work but not at the same time. Then second are the safety protocols and measures that should be in place in addition to the ones that you had before. And basically this goes from assessing every risk and managing it to mitigate it as much as possible. So you need to assess every situation and everything that will put people at risk and think if you can mitigate the risk with either protective measures, preventive measures, or just completely eliminate that activity because it's just too risky. So some of the protocols, for example, are isolation procedures in case there's someone with symptoms at work. Of course, that if you have symptoms or if you have been in contact with people with symptoms or tested positive, you should stay at home. So please don't go to the lab. You should have these measures in place in case something like this happens. And of course, providing all necessary hand sanitizer and PPE face coverings. We'll discuss more on that later. The third, it's connected to the first one, so it's regarding reducing number of people. So I think it's very important to identify what are the lab's most critical functions. So probably people that are responsible for the safety in the lab, for the new rules, the new protocols in place, but also technical people. People that need to be in the lab in order for the researchers to be able to use some equipment, for example, like equipment specialists. And then, of course, the people that have deadlines which did not get extended, people with scholarships, people on limited funding, for example, people basically whose work got really affected and really delayed. So I think those should be the first ones allowed in so they can progress as fast as possible and try to catch up. And all of these, you can do it by controlling the access and basically the bookings of the equipment or even the space. And I'll develop more of these as well with BOOKKIT and how you can do it. So you can prevent... sorry, Moto, can you please mute yourself? So basically controlling the access and the bookings will prevent having too many people at the same time in the lab. And fourth, of course, because this is all new for everyone, you should provide proper training, making sure that everyone knows what to do when going to the lab, when leaving the lab, and while in the lab. So we need to have all the technical stuff ready, prepared for emergencies, ready for providing training as well for other people. And one thing that I think it's important is those equipment where normally wouldn't need 2 people to manage it because someone is not trained but they want to use it. So if you can train people on these equipment, you can reduce the number of people from 2 to 1 at the lab at the same time using that equipment. So if you could train in remotely, that would be even better. So this is basically just appealing from some autonomy, so non-essential people are not in the lab. Then after all of these where the solutions and the guidelines come from. So I'm actually going to use as a template the UK government's guidelines for labs and research facilities when returning to the lab. So if you have a look, I'll post the link later and I'll send the slides over as well as the recording. But if you read through it, it's quite general. So I think they just adapted to a lot of services and a lot of areas. And you can see some tailored stuff for research facilities. But overall, it's quite repetitive. So I tried to summarize the best and use it as a template for the next slides. So I'll be covering these 5 points. So it goes from risk, to social distancing at work, which I like to call physical distancing, and then of course cleaning workspace, PPEs and face coverings, and workforce management, basically managing the teams, the research teams. So first goes to the risks. So we have mentioned it already. So please, if you can work from home, continue doing so. That should be the first option always. And do not do non-essential work in the lab because you're taking someone else's place. And these things like reading, writing, analyzing data, things that you can do remotely without any issues, then you should be doing them outside of the lab. And basically to do this, you can take all possible actions, and this goes from the very ones that we all know, like hand washing very often, to disinfecting everything. But I think in here, I think scientists have an advantage, especially scientists that are used to deal with biological samples, especially cells or animals. In the cell culture hood, for example, I think it's just a matter of adapting everything that we do inside the hood, outside of the hood, to the entire lab, basically. So we always wear gloves and disinfect everything before and after using a cell culture hood. So that's basically what you should do outside of the lab, on your own lab bench, for example. And that goes from cleaning all surfaces and equipments, like the machines, buttons, pipettes, things that are used and touched quite regularly and used by more than one person. So normally the pipette kits are shared, for example. So just make sure that you disinfect them, and you also disinfect your gloves. And in the end, I think we will be fine if we use the rules that we already know when dealing with sensitive stuff like cells, just outside of the hood, basically. And then, of course, this is a quote from the government document, which basically you need to be realistic, basically. So if an activity is just posing too much risk, then you should probably do not go forward with it, and just postpone it until a better future where things are a little bit better, so you can take that extra risk, basically. Maybe it's not worth it right now, so you should assess it first. Second is physical distancing, as I like to call it. So that goes from basic rules like keeping people at least 2 meters apart from each other. So this might require redesigning the way the lab is organized. For example, if you have lab benches or furniture that you can move around, try to do it so people can work away from each other, not too close or not too crowded in the lab. And of course, in these, I mean, there are several rules depending on how much space you have, but I've seen some governments having the 4 square meter rules, so 4 square meters per person. I think that's how most labs are determining the number of people that they would allow it in. But it really depends. Some people want to be really safe, and they do like 6 until 10 square meters per person, so they really reduce it to the minimum possible. And then some people get creative, like screens or barriers to separate people from each other. So normally cell culture hoods, for example, because they are like quite long, normally there's a person using the left side and the right side of it. So you might use a screen or a barrier to separate those two spots. Then you can also encourage back-to-back or side-to-side working instead of being face-to-face. This also decreases the chances of contaminating other person if you are infected and you don't know. And then, of course, having teams in place also helps reducing the number of people that you contact with. So then it's also easier to trace in case something happens, easier to isolate, and you don't need to isolate the whole team. You just need to isolate the few people that were working together, basically. And if the lab allows it, for example, if you have 2 entrances to the lab, maybe use one for a way in and the other one for a way out, so people don't bump into each other. And basically also signs on the floor usually help. Basically delimiting corridors for circulating inside the lab, exactly to avoid people running into each other. Then cleaning the workspace goes beyond the disinfection and the cleaning itself. So for example, before reopening, ventilation issues should be something you have fixed. I've seen some studies about air conditioning that a lot of people are not turning them on because they could actually help the spread of viral particles. But ventilation, you should assure good ventilation in the lab. especially because most labs are closed and don't even have windows. So if you need maintenance on the ventilation system, please do it before reopening. And then make sure, of course, frequent cleaning, clearing workspace after you have finished, and the regular stuff about hand sanitizer pretty much everywhere and not just in the washrooms. Then fourth is about PPE and face coverings. This might be a controversial thing, if it's beneficial or not. We believe that this is beneficial as a precautionary measure, basically. So I see a lot of closed spaces in a lot of countries where it's actually mandatory to use them. And I've seen some labs as well, big buildings, making it mandatory as well. I'll share an example and that you can see as well. And then, of course, before you put a face covering or a mask on, wash your hands. And also after removing it, make sure that you have discarded it properly if it's not reusable. If it's reusable, make sure that you wash it at least once a day at high temperatures. And even if you're wearing a face covering, please still practice the physical distancing. Then finally, team management, so workforce management. Again, it goes back to reducing number of people. So plan to have the minimum number of people needed on sites. So you can use a booking system to restrict this as well. But then critical staff, either for safety or technical related, they should be in the lab, at least even for emergencies. So it's very important that they are there. And then, of course, please don't stop monitoring the well-being of the team. Not only the ones that are already working in the lab, but also the ones that are still at home. And then it's just a matter of communicating clearly all the new rules, all the instructions, making sure that everyone understands what they need to do, and making sure that everyone is happy with the new reality and adapted to it. And that just keep everyone updated regarding any events that might occur. And then, of course, in the end, it's all about reconnecting the team. So I think people seeing each other more often now in person will help already. And hopefully, with time, the situation will also improve. So now, how BOOKKIT can help, basically. So we'll share some examples from other labs, but I will just give you a quick overview of what BOOKKIT is. I think most of you know, but basically, I'll just be really quick. So BOOKKIT basically is a lab booking system. So it's specifically designed for laboratories and research facilities. So it's not like a calendar, not like Outlook or like an events planning calendar. This is really designed for labs, and we do everything based on user feedback. So all the features that we have here is because a lot of labs have requested and are benefiting from it now. So it's completely free of charge for academic labs, and you can have an unlimited number of labs, equipment, users, and so on. The good thing about the system is actually it's designed to connect a whole organization. So if you have several labs within one university, you could have them all connected, which also increases the visibility and the transparency across laboratories. So basically, it's 100% online, so you can do everything remotely and safely from home. Then you can use the system to assign different schedules, so people will only be allowed to book on the times that they were assigned to. Then you can control the amount of people in the lab, so if a lab only can have 2 people at a time, you limit it to 2 people, and there will never be more than 2 people in the lab because they can't book more than 2 people at the same time. Then you can also use it to attach all kinds of SOPs and safety guidelines, not only old ones, but also the new ones that you have in place for this new situation. So they always stay attached to every piece of equipment or lab space that you have people booking. And then you can also use the announcements feature to communicate. So I mentioned the communication was really crucial. So to use this for the regular stuff like maintenance and breakdowns, but also for incidents in case something happens, so it's quickly spreads to everyone. And last but not least, because the system records all the bookings, so you have a history of bookings. If in case anything happens and someone is actually tested positive, you know exactly with whom they were in contact with. So you could just trace everything back and isolate those people. So it's easier as well to check the history. Before moving on, we have a question from Steve. Yes, Steve, there will be. We'll send the slides along with the recording. So, planning the return with BOOKKIT. These are the three main things that you can do. So first of all, follow international examples. So labs in countries that were not that affected, or maybe that were severely affected but are already opening up. Follow the examples that we'll share in a second. And then also your local government guidelines, and prepare the team basically for this new reality, for the new rules. What normally we recommend is that you have a remote training session, like a Zoom meeting, like you normally do for lab meetings, but for the return to the lab. So you might introduce a new booking system, for example, the new rules, the new ways of operating, and you can even discuss with them if they're happy, if they would like to suggest different things, because it also varies a lot with the kind of work that you do and with the amount of time that you need to be in the lab, basically. Then you can use lab slots or bays in BOOKKIT to control the number of people. So this is basically, instead of uploading equipment like you in a normal situation would do, you just upload a lab slot or base, and people would just be booking the space and not the equipment in there. Of course, you can use both, so then you can track which equipment they are using. But the best way to limit the number of people is to use the spaces, basically. So if you have limited spaces, you will have limited number of people in the lab. Then again, and the schedules and the shifts, and using the groups function as well, it helps managing the teams. And I will show you some of these in the examples. So we have a question from Toinette. Is there an option to add an online form for daily health monitoring? Yes, so basically you can have these forms either attached to an equipment, for example, or a daily health service that people can request, and then they will just fill it out and send you through the system. So that is absolutely possible. So to finish all of this and to return to the lab, basically what you need to do is two things. So one is having a list of all the equipment that is going to be booked or the lab space. So basically, according to either the 4 square meters rule per person or more, if you want to be extra careful, you can just try to divide the lab into the different spaces that will be used by people, and then you just make a list of them. So for example, if you have 3 labs, I'll show more examples, but 3 labs with different capacities, you just put the different capacities for them, and then you list them all. We can help you populating the system with those. And then, of course, a list of all the users that will be using the system, as well as the groups if you have the team basically divided in groups. So, to the examples now. One is just a general one to show you kind of an overview of what I was just talking about. Basically, this is the big research space. And in this space, we have 3 different labs, so 3 different physical spaces, which have different capacities. So we have a chemistry lab, a wet lab, and a workshop place. So the chemistry lab, for example, has a maximum of 3 people, and they actually have 3 bays there, and we'll just allow 1 person per bay, basically. That's why the limit is 3. And in this case, you see a screenshot of our calendar. I just cropped it out in the middle, so it wasn't too long, but we're looking at a weekly view, and you see bay 1, 2, and 3 listed below the chemistry lab. And basically, people would just book time slots on them as they would book equipment. And then the same goes for wet lab. And in the wet lab, we call them lab slots. And in the workshop, there's actually 6 workstations. So there's actually 1 person per workstation. So there's a maximum of 6. So you see some of the bookings already. If we change to the daily view, you actually see the number of hours. But these basically prevents more than the people that you have defined as a maximum limit to be in the lab at the same time, because the system would just not allow more bookings than the ones that are available, basically. So they can't book bay 4, for example. They can't be a 4th person in the lab at the same time. So we have some questions before moving on, and I think it makes sense to answer them now. One is from Jenny Arman. Jenny's asking if there's a way of identifying what workstations are not available. Yes, so basically the ones that will not be available are the ones that have bookings on. So as you see here, workstation 1 is booked on Monday, somewhere between the morning and the afternoon. And then you see that workstation 2 and 6 are actually not available because we have done an announcement. So that's a feature that you can do to block some of the spaces. And you can either do this on a conditional basis, so you manually can just book them, or you basically tell people that you can't book workstations next to each other. But in that case, I would just remove them all, basically. And then I also have a question, references for the square meters per person in the lab. Yes, that's from actually an Australian government. I can post the link here or send it attached to the slides at the end, actually. Yes, Jenny. So basically the conditional has to be done manually right now. That's a feature that has been requested quite a lot, actually. We are thinking about developing it. So we'll be sending out actually a newsletter today for some of the future wishes. And depending on the user feedback, again, as I said, that will change our roadmap and pipeline. But we are already actually developing some very cool features that would also allow you to do this, which is, for example, booking of multiple equipment at the same time. So if you're booking workstation 1 and 2 and 3 gets unavailable, you just book the 3 of them and mention the one that you will be using. So in that case, no one else will be able to book the other ones, and they become automatically unavailable. And Gaston has a question as well. Identity of the admin that can regulate the use of the space. I'm not sure I understood the question, but basically the ones that are in charge of the lab are either the lab admin, but we also have different roles that can help managing these spaces, like technicians or instructors. We can actually have the responsibility for specific slots. So I think I will leave some of the questions for the Q&A, and I will just move on. So Mark, I didn't forget you. I'm reading your question right now, but I'll get back to you. So moving on to the second example, we have a Portuguese Research Institute here. So this is a different scenario. It's a way bigger building, and there's actually more than 20 labs, so individual research groups. And the thing that I was mentioning before, so mask is mandatory inside. So any kind of face covering, people need to use it within the building, so at all times. And they only allow 4 people per lab at a time. Of course, that depends on how big the labs are, but in this case, all labs are the same size. And then they can only work for 3 hours consecutively as well. So that's basically something that you can also put in place, so people are not in the lab too much or too long, basically. And then we have a German research group. So this is an individual lab with a team of 20 people. And what they did was they split the team in 10 people groups, so 2 groups of 10 people, and they assigned them 2 different schedules on BOOKKIT. One, it's a morning schedule, and the other one is the afternoon. And they also only allow 5 people in the lab at a time. So you see that we have created 5 people, so person 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That shows you basically the flexibility, because you can just name the space or the person wherever you want, and then people will just book them. It's just a matter of the limits that you have within the lab. And then you see the schedule that we have assigned. So this is for one of the groups in which I have alternated the morning and the afternoon shifts. So then, for example, people that have, overnight analysis or overnight imaging, for example, it might be useful to be there one day in the afternoon and the other way and the next day in the morning. So they can just collect the results from the experiment that was running overnight. Of course, that is all flexible. You can discuss this with your team, see what fits them the best, and you can come back and change it at any time. That's why I think that meeting it's so important to have with the team, saying, look, we're going to implement different shifts. We would like to know your opinion. Do you think your work will be done here? I think people will need to be ready for not being able to be in the lab the whole day like they used to be. But I think we can find a healthy compromise between allowing people to do work and also allowing people to stay safe and healthy. And finally, I think we have a fourth one from a core facility. This one is actually from the University of Cambridge in the UK. So it's a central facility that serves all of the research groups, and it has more than 40 users and 8 equipments. And in this case, they are not booking lab spaces, though they are booking equipment as usual. So it doesn't matter, I mean, microscopes, wherever you have in the lab, they are being booked as usual. The thing that they have in place is they reduce the number of people by using different schedules and allowing people at the same time. But one interesting thing here is that they have introduced 15 minutes cleaning sessions every hour. So this is something that you can actually put in place with BOOKKIT. So what we do is the maximum booking time is 45 minutes. So people cannot book longer than 45 minutes consecutively. And then the start step of any booking, it's only on the hour. So that means, for example, that from 10 a.m. to 10:45, people can book the equipment. They can either book 15 minutes, half an hour, or 45 minutes, which is the maximum. And then between 10:45 and 11, there won't be any bookings because it's cleaning time. And that's actually the way we set it up on the system, is that the system will not allow anything to be booked because the bookings can only start on the hour. So it means that the next booking can only start at 11. And then again from 11:45 until noon, and there won't be any bookings again. And then the next one starts at noon and so on. So that is something that I think it's quite beneficial. We have been requested to introduce some of these as well by other people. I mean, it's just 15 minutes. It's not that long. And I think it's enough for you to just give a general cleaning and disinfection of the lab. And you can also have these in place when people change shifts, so when the morning group leaves and the afternoon comes, for example, and so on. So just to kind of wrap up, we have published a case study, so you can see some of the testimonials from current book users. So these ones are, this is a quite interesting case study because one university is from a country, so Copenhagen in Denmark, a country that was not that affected by this pandemic. They did quite well. And then we have Italy. As we know, they were severely affected, but they are back to work. They are using BOOKKIT. So that's University of Bologna. You can just follow the link and check it out. And then I'm also going to leave here the UK government guidance for the labs and research facilities. And then some 2 articles for cleaning and distancing and also tips to reopen the lab. And I think I will add the 4 square meter rule here as well. And then we also have a dedicated landing page for returning to the lab with BOOKKIT, which you can check out and see more examples and read more about it. And right now I think we'll just do the Q&A because I have some questions to answer to, starting with Mark. So, but please, if you have questions, please feel free to write them now. This is the right time to ask them, actually. So, Mark, basically, they want to connect instruments to lab spaces, rooms, with 5 equipments which need to be bookable, but only 2 people can work in the room at the same time. Yes. So, Mark, the way we can do this is I will show you in a demo session more in detail, and I can show you to you privately as well. We just jump on a quick call. Basically, we can have these instruments as add-ons, and basically we still have the lab spaces being booked, but then people would need to basically mention which instruments they will be using when they booked that lab space. So let's say that someone books lab space 1, and they will be using a microscope, a cell culture hood, and a centrifuge. So they can do this. There's several ways of doing this. One is through the add-ons. The other one is through the notes section, which they will just type basically on the booking which instruments they will be using, and everything will stay recorded. You can read all about it. Other people can also see it. And it stays there and it's linked basically. So Jenny, okay, workstations that are closer than 2 meters, which basically need to be booked at separate times. Okay, so I think in this case, I would just remove completely the workstations that are closer than 2 meters. So either you put some screens or barriers between them, but if you don't want to do them and you really want to make sure they're not being used at the same time, I will just create workstations, like general workstations, and then you just assign people the workstation that they can work in when they book. But I think we can discuss this afterwards. It really depends on the case, but I think we can definitely help. And then Amar has a question regarding, I have book equipment sets to unavailable, but it looks like it's still bookable. So Amar, when you do something unavailable, it doesn't become unavailable to you if you are the lab admin. So basically the lab admin can overrule any kind of rules that you have in place. That is probably why it's still bookable from your side, but if you ask a student of yours or a researcher, they won't be able to do it. And Ioana has also a question. So in Ioana's lab, there's some equipment which stands quite near with each other and they can't move it. So they want to have a way that it's possible to book one and the other one is automatically blocked for booking. So I think Ioana's question is the same one as Jenny in the beginning. So an automatic feature that automatically blocks instruments when other instruments are booked, basically. So as I said, I think the best way here is either to, I mean, this is a feature that we are really looking at to develop, but in the meantime, there's some clever workarounds that you can have in place. One is the one that I mentioned with the lab spaces, and then people would just mention the equipment that they would be booking. So you don't really list the equipment, you list the lab spaces, and then people mention which equipment they will be using. So in this case, you just measure the size of your lab, you set a limit of people, and then people will be booking slots in the lab, not the equipment. And when they book the slot, they mention which equipment they are using. I think that's really a very easy and straightforward way also for people, because it gets quite tricky to tell the system which equipment to block if someone books another. So there's, I think, an infinite amount of combinations with several equipments, which really depend on the proximity from each other. Amar is setting maximum booking time. So Amar, again, I think you're having the same issue. If you are the lab admin, basically you can do whatever you want on the system. So I would suggest that either you create a student account to test all these rules, or you just ask one of your students or researchers to do it, because most of the rules will not apply for you, because you can basically overrule them because you're the lab admin. And then we have a great info, many thanks from UL staff. Thank you very much. Ioana, also another question from Ioana. So a break of 30 minutes for every 2 hours. I think we can look into that. I will get back to you individually. So we can definitely do the 15 minutes every hour. Let me have a look at the 30 minutes every 2 hours. I'll get back to you on that. And then Alejandro, yes, so the slides and the recording, so presentation with audio as well, and as well as these questions and answers, you will get them, don't worry. Moy, a question from Moy. Can users make announcements even if they don't have admin rights, so they can flag issues they have encountered, for example? Yes, so you just need to assign them the right role. So there's a role, there's a table with all the roles and all the actions that they can do. So if you want to allow, for example, Mary to do an announcement, you just give them the right role. So if you give them a technician role, for example, she will be able to make announcements to flag any issues. So I would just advise you to give them those access rights. It's easy as that. And then we have UL staff question. So yeah, so the question is regarding face visors, if they are enough or if they need to wear a mask underneath the visor. So basically, so we are not experts in masks or visors. What we see in labs is that a mask is it's better than a visor, of course. So it's, first of all, it's closer to your face, and then it's not just a glass, a physical barrier. So normally it has a filtering capacity, which helps. Of course, you need to take all precautions when you're wearing a mask, so you make sure that you clean your hands when putting on and after removing it. If it's not reusable, just discard them. Don't use it for too long. And then if it's reusable, make sure that you wash it, and so on. So I would advise on wearing masks. If you have visors, that's even better. But what we see here is that if you practice physical distancing and wear a mask, that should be enough. Question from Satinder. Can we create reports for contact tracing in terms of equipment use? Yes, absolutely. So the reports feature on the system allows you to download all bookings on any kind of equipment or all of them, and then you can actually check who was there at a certain time at a certain dates. So you can definitely go back and trace everything. A question from Katerina: to set up the space in the lab, for example, base, do we do it in the same way as to create equipment? Yes. So this is a question that comes quite often. So when you create an equipment, there's an add equipment button, and you just name the equipment the name of the bay or the lab space. And then for the model and manufacturer fields, you just put an n/a, because in this case, it's not applicable, basically. Question from Cecilia regarding BOOKKIT, using BOOKKIT on a smartphone. Yes, absolutely. So BOOKKIT is mobile friendly, so you can access it on any browser on your phone. You can also use it to book equipment. And of course, it works better on a tablet because you basically need to drag and drop the slot on the calendar. We don't have an app yet that is being developed. But it's the website is mobile friendly and it works. We have people using it basically. I think it's just a matter of adapting it to it. And but of course, if you have a laptop, I think at least the layout it's better. Manvika, thank you very much. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Ray, John, Alejandro. I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation. So Jenny, just a discussion, you guys can read it. So of course, masks can become very hot, especially now in summer. So yes, I mean, it's quite tricky, as I said. Of course, that you can't be touching on your mask all the time. Maybe a visor in that case would be useful. But I think it could also basically, I mean, it's just a matter of seeing how many people are around you and close to you as well. So that's why reducing the number of people in the lab at the same time is such an important measure to take. Carl, thank you very much. Thank you guys. Ben, Santinder, Ode, Katarina. I think there's another question here from Ben. Thank you, Ben, for the feedback. Really appreciate it. So I think, so yes, so we can basically already do a whiteout implementation of the system. So we're actually talking to some organizations right now to do a full implementation of the system in the States and in Australia, for example. We're just going through some questions and forms right now. And but the system is completely ready. So as I said, it's designed to do a network of labs within an institution. So if you want to do it on a university-wide basis, on a department-wide basis, we can definitely do it. It's not just on lab by lab. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Joanna, Tamar, Cecilia, Emma. UL staff question: can BOOKKIT be used for undergrad labs? Yes, absolutely. So that depends on the lab space that you have. And the equipment, but that can definitely be used, so it's the same. So you just put the spaces there, you add the users, and they're good to go, basically. Thank you very much, guys. There's so many good messages here. Thank you, Christina, Rosie, Anna, Ben, Mukesh, Martina. I think I didn't miss any questions. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Toinette. Have a question here from Elise. How do you make an equipment a subset of a bay? Good question. I'm gonna show you that on the demo. So it's using the rooms field when adding an equipment on the top right corner, Elise. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. So Elise, if you stay for the demo session, I'll show you how you do that. Gillian, yes, the system is free of charge. So everything that I'm about to show, it's completely free of charge. You can just use it on an academic basis, of course. So we have a question from Pete. I think it's on the same basis as Joanna's and Jenny's questions. For adjacent equipment, if item A is set to run for several hours, but the user only needs to be there for the first and last 15, can item B be made available while item A is running? So I guess that depends on the relationship between item A and item B, which I'm not sure if you have described. So I don't know if the equipment B becomes unavailable during those hours or not. So basically, if item A is booked for several hours and the user only goes there in the first and last 15, the item B can still be booked, and the user from item A can just block item B for the first and last 15 minutes, so they know they won't run into each other. Or you can do it as well from the admin perspective. So yes, that is possible. So item B will be available by default, and then you just block the first and last 15 minutes. Yeah, good. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Thea. Gaston, thank you very much. I don't know if you guys have any more questions. Otherwise, I'll just give you a quick look into the system. I don't know if there's still quite a lot of people here. So if you have questions, I'll get back to you. But let me just show you the system. So basically, let me just, I think I need to share a different tab. Yep. So I think you can see it now. So as I said, the system is 100% online. So after you log in, you land on the dashboard. This is just an example account that we have. You will see your own activities, but also the lab activities, so what people are booking. And then on the calendar, basically, you see, this is the example that I actually had the screenshot from. And so I want to show you the daily view, so you see the hours as well. So you actually see, for example, if someone books from 7 until 1 p.m., there can't be another person there, basically. That's how we limit the number of people. Then if you want to book something, you just click on Bay 1, for example, from Chemistry Lab. We look at the calendar. In this case, it's all free. So I'm going to book for tomorrow from 10 to 12. So just a simple drag and drop. As a lab admin, you can also book on behalf of other people. And then you just click on book equipment, and basically the Bay 1 is booked for you for those times. So here you are presented with the history. So this is the useful part for tracing back everything. And basically that's what the dashboard does and the bookings. Then on the equipment part, to add equipment, this is for Elise specifically, but I think it's useful for other people. So let's say that we are adding Bay 1 here. And Bay 1, in this case, doesn't belong to the chemistry lab, but it belongs to the biology lab. So on the right side, we have this room field, and we see that the rooms that are available already. So in this case, I'm going to create a new one. So it's called biology lab. So the way you create a new one is you type in whatever you want, and then you press enter. So the system will automatically accept it. If you want to remove and change, there's a small X here, and you just click on it and choose a different one or type in a different thing. I'm going to type in the same again, biology lab, and then manufacturer, in this case, it doesn't apply, model as well, and then equipment description, you can just do whatever you want here. So I'm just going to do a dash because it's a mandatory field. The price information, you may skip it if you don't charge your students or your researchers. And then time and availability, this is basically something that I've shown as well. So minimum and maximum times, the start step here on the right. And then you can even do peak hours for maximum booking time. So you can define a peak hours window and then just define the number of either minutes, hours, days, per booking, per day, per week, and so on, that people can book within the peak hours or just do it outside of peak hours as well. And then afterwards, you just click on create equipment, and then we will see the Bay 1 from biology lab available not only here, but also on the calendar. So you see here, this is the one that we have created. And for the user, I'm going to skip the services, but basically, if you want to do the daily health checkup, for example, like it was asked before, so you can just name this daily health monitoring, And then because you can attach documents to this, so then you would attach the documents, the survey or the form, and then people would just fill it out and send it to you through this service. So this is a tool that you can use to offer services like imaging analysis, training, any kind of technical support that you want to do for your own users. But you can also use it for things like this, in which you need to receive documents from people. So if you attach the form here, people will be able to download, they can fill them out, and afterwards they can send you through the services, basically. Users, you get an overview of everyone that is registered. As I mentioned, we have a table here with the different roles. And if we choose, for example, students, so you see here the different roles that we have. It goes from student, researcher, technician, and instructor. So a question regarding the announcements, you see here who can make announcements. So if you want to make them able to do announcements to flag issues, you just need to assign them a technician role or an instructor role. Basically, the instructor is someone that is responsible for specific lab spaces or specific equipment. So basically, these asterisks is what they mean. So they are allowed to perform these actions, but on the equipment or the services that they are assigned to. And the way you invite them is through filling out the first, last name, and the email address. And because if you have a list of these, as I mentioned, it's one of the things that you can just gather quite quickly. We will be more than happy to do a bulk upload and invite everyone to it. So they stay on your accounts with a proper role that you have defined. And afterwards, they will just be here as active. So one small note here is that the technicians, they do not require groups, but normal users, so apart from technicians, they would require a group. So the system knows basically which equipment or which spaces they are allowed to book and which equipment and rules to follow, basically. So on the groups part, you define basically all kinds of rules, like if the bookings need approval, and later on, when this pandemic has passed and you can use the system for normal booking of equipment, you can enforce approval on some of the sensitive equipment, for example. Then you can also limit the usage per group member to a certain number of hours, or per day, per week, or per month. So it's fair for everyone. So they are not in the lab too much time and blocking time for other people. So you can also do this. You can also allow them to cancel and edit bookings. Having funding codes, which links to the projects part that I'll show you. But this is just if you charge people and want to know where the money is coming from. And then you just define the schedule here, basically. So you can do different schedules for trained and untrained members. But if untrained members can't see the equipment or use it, you just hide the equipment, which sometimes it's quite useful. And then you just define the schedule here. So if you want to block Sunday the whole day, you just deselect the day, so it will turn basically gray, and then you select the whole day here. So this is a way that you can block some periods of time during the week, for example. So you just do the other way around. Instead of being blue, it's gray, and then you select a time slot that will be blocked. And then you just assign the equipment or the spaces and the people. And basically, every time a person of this group interacts with an equipment from this group, the system knows that it will follow these rules up here. The project part, this is just regarding funding codes, so you can basically track everything that you want to, if you charge people, so you can have funding codes attached, and then people can choose them when booking equipment. Then the announcements feature, which I mentioned, very important for communication. You can make announcements based on a period of bookings or just on specific equipments. So for example, on equipments, you know that entire chemistry lab, for example, something happened on the lab, like a spill or something else, and you just search for all the users of that lab. They will be automatically selected, so John and Lisa. And then you can either make all of the spaces in the lab unavailable, and you just define, or not, so it's just a matter of blocking the calendar or not, and then define the time during which the lab will become unavailable. And then you send everyone a message, they get an email which is always useful if they are not logged in into the system. But if they are, they also get notified through the announcements icon appear. Then you can also use announcements to make general announcements. So there's two types actually. So general announcements, it's basically the same as sending out an email to everyone. And the thing is that you have everyone listed here, and you can just select the people that you want or all of them. Then finally, the reports. Quite useful for tracing, but also to check equipment usage and any kind of statistics that you want. So you know, number of hours booked, number of hours that people were in the lab last month, for example, and so on. So we have a basic filtering here, but I think the advanced ones, it's actually more useful because you can define a time period here, and then you can have filters on top of filters. So you can filter by equipment, and then filter by users, and then filter, for example, by groups or by projects, or even by status, for example. If you want all the bookings that were completed, or I want to check actually all the bookings that were cancelled. So you can do all of this, and then just download. It will give you a nice Excel file with everything organized, everything listed according to the filters that you have in place. And then you can even aggregate the data by users, equipment and users, lab, and so on. So this is useful, and basically aggregation means that instead of getting a long list of all the bookings, it will aggregate by the users or by equipment. So you can actually check immediately number of hours booked, so you don't get the individual bookings. Okay, so Peter booked 1 hour, Mary booked 2 hours, and so on. So you get the number of hours booked on an equipment or booked by a user or a group of users, and so on. And it's nice to keep track of everything, see who was in contact with whom, and so on. So I think that's pretty much it from my side. I think one useful thing is that our system actually has a very good advantage for scientists, which is a sharing platform. So this is completely optional, but you can access it in case you need equipment that you don't have access to. And basically just through this search bar here on the top, you just search for wherever you're looking for that your lab doesn't have. Or if you have actually several labs within your university using BOOKKIT, and if they have made the equipment available to other labs, you can actually share equipment within the same organization. So this is all about the transparency that I was talking about before, but also encouraging collaboration. And so you see here some examples. These are real things. Confocal microscopes at the University of Oxford, an optical microscope at WPE in the States, for example, and so on. So you see services and equipment, and then you can just request this from other labs if you don't have them. And you can do the same. So you can also have your equipment to be shared with others. So that's basically it from my side. We still have 100 people listening. So thank you very much, really, from the bottom of my heart to stay here listening to the presentation. It's really a pleasure. We have never had this many people attending. Let me just check if there's more questions. Yes, there's more questions. Let's see, what was the last one? Yeah, so I think Ben here. Will there always be an option to download the entire database of equipment users, CSV, if we wish in the future to move to a different system? Of course, Ben, that we don't want you to do that. Why would you? BOOKKIT is such a great system, and we're just improving. I mean, more features will come, and it's free of charge. Come on. But yes, Ben, so it's your data. We can just give you the lists whenever you want. If you want the list of all of the equipment and the users. We don't have the option available on the front end, but we can give you all that data from the back ends whenever you want it. Of course, that we would do our best for you not to move to a different system, but we would be more than happy to help you in that case as well. Anna has a question. So when booking, is there an option to request the booking where the request has to be approved before it's actually booked? Yes. So actually, let's go back to the option on the groups. Maybe I answered the question. Maybe this question was made before I showed. But on the groups, there's an option there that you can make it mandatory to require approval. So then you as a lab admin or technicians or instructors can just accept or decline a booking. So yeah, that is possible. Satinder is asking for new roles with personalized actions. So there will be new roles added in the future. And we are also thinking about changing and the customizing field, so you can just check or uncheck some of the boxes. That is not available at the moment, I'm afraid. But we are thinking about it, definitely. Moto is asking, is there some space to add risk assessment forms? So I think you can use the services the same way we do the daily health monitoring. Or you can just put the risk assessments attached to each space, because they are equipment, so you can also actually attach documents to each equipment and space. Maria is asking, thank you for the feedback. Do groups rules override the individual users ones? So basically the system doesn't allow conflict. So every time there's a conflict of rules, it will give you an error message, of course. So the groups, if you see, there's no really rules on the groups that overrides the individual ones. But you either do group rules or individual ones, depending on the equipment, of course. So if you have individual rules for some equipment and then group rules for the same equipment, the system will give you an error message. Then Andreas, can you add the role for the responsible person for a certain lab if an organization has many labs? Yes. So that is something that it's going to be available by the end of the month. So we are doing a small refactoring of the system. It will allow you to be responsible for a lot of labs, and it will allow you to be a researcher in more than one lab, a technician in more than one lab as well. But for now, you can already do that. So basically, I think you want someone to be responsible for one lab or more than one lab. So if it's for one lab, you can definitely do it. So it's one account, you're the lab admin of it. If it's several labs, you would just list the several labs on one account and you're still the lab admin of all of them. I hope I understood the question correctly and clarified it for you. If not, please write me again. Ben, another question. So can the lab admin set which email alerts notifications are received by each role? No, yeah. So basically each user can specify under the notifications. So on the top right corner under the profile, if they click on notifications, they can just, basically notifications are all on by default. They could just turn them off if they want. But the lab admin cannot control other users' notifications, only her own, basically. Robert is asking, can you transfer administrative status to someone else? Yes. So just let us know which person should have the lab admin role, and we will transfer it right away. As I said, in 2 weeks, basically, you will be able to, in 1 week actually, until the end of the month, you'll be able to have more than one lab admin on the lab as well. So maybe you don't need to transfer. But even if you want to transfer, we can do it quite easily. Just let us know. Elise, another question. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry. You may have mentioned this briefly. If two independent labs set up BOOKKIT, can they subsequently link them? Yes. So the way you do this, something that I didn't show, it's basically you can be a guest in another lab. So basically, if everyone in one lab is a guest in one lab and the other way around, they're basically linked and they can see both calendars under the same calendar on their account. But we can help you with this. Let me just share the screen so you have my contact details here. I will continue on answering the questions. But basically, feel free to write me an email if you have more specific questions and if you have an account and you're having troubles doing that. And so, Satinder, thank you. Thank you, Ben. Definitely. Renata as okay, same problem as Pete. Maybe I answer. Let me just quickly read it. We have a limit of people inside the room, and there are several equipment, but some of them only need the user to be in the room at the beginning and end of the experiments. Booking the instrument, but only blocking the room. Okay. So if only one person can be I mean, it depends if only one person can be in the room at that time. But I think we can discuss this individually. Can you please just write me individually? I'll be happy to help. I don't want to just bother everyone with further discussions, but we can definitely help you doing this by the looks of what you're saying. Yeah. Gillian, what length of training session would you provide for the users for the new setup? I think that depends on how many rules and how many new things there are in the lab. But I guess, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes, and then answering all of the questions that they might have. I think that would be enough, but I think it depends. I don't know if that was the question exactly. I hope so. Sarah is asking a question. Thank you for the feedback. How to make arriving to the lab safer? That's a good question. I mean, maybe some people have some input here. So I think basically preventing, I mean, if people can just ride a bike or walk instead of taking public transportation, or if they have individual transport, that will help, I think, so they don't get in contact with too many people. But then again, arrive to the lab wearing a mask, probably bring some hand sanitizer, disinfect hands when you enter the building. Maybe you want to have some, I don't know if it makes sense, but like protective socks for the shoes. I think it really depends on the kind of lab that you have as well. But just common sense sometimes, but you can have some of these, you can suggest to them, definitely. Thank you guys. A lot of good feedback. Georgie, Simona, Sven, Katarina, Nat, and Mia. Thanks a lot. I think I've covered all of the questions. I don't know if you guys have anything more. Please just let me know. Write me. That's my email. So it's f.raio@bookkit.org. And we'll be more than happy to support you in using BOOKKIT and returning safely to the lab.